Hi there. Welcome to NapTime History channel. Tonight we're going to explore one of history's most misunderstood professions, the medieval court jester. You're standing in a cold stone hall, bells jingling with every nervous twitch, as a room full of nobles stares at you expectantly. The Lord's expression is already souring, and you haven't even told your first joke yet. One wrong word, one joke that falls flat, and you might not leave this room alive. Yeah, you probably won't survive this job interview. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. All right, let's begin the story. You shuffle forward, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing down on your shoulders like invisible hands. The great hall stretches before you, tapestries depicting bloody battles hanging from walls that have witnessed more executions than celebrations. Your potential employer, Lord Blackwood, sits on his carved throne, fingers drumming impatiently on the armrest. He's already rejected 3 applicants today. One was flogged for a joke about the Lord's receding hairline, another thrown in the stocks for fumbling a juggling routine, and the third, well, nobody's quite sure what happened to the third. The position opened up after the previous jester made an unfortunate quip about the Lord's new wife looking rather similar to his prize mare. That jester's bells now hang from the castle gate as a warning, still ringing softly in the wind. You've traveled for weeks to get here, spending your last coins on this ridiculous outfit because, apparently, you can't even audition without already looking the part. The red and yellow motley costume cost more than most peasants see in a year, and the pointed cap with its trio of bells won't stop making noise no matter how still you try to stand. Well? Lord Blackwood's voice cuts through the hall like a blade through butter. Are you going to entertain us, or just stand there like a colorful scarecrow? Your throat feels like someone stuffed it with wool. This is the moment that determines whether you'll eat tonight or ever again. Medieval lords weren't known for their patience or their mercy, especially when it came to failed entertainers. The mainstream historical fact that most people don't realize is that becoming a court jester wasn't some whimsical career choice. It was often a desperate last resort for those with few other options. Historians still argue whether the mortality rate for failed jester applicants was higher than for soldiers going into battle, but the evidence suggests it was pretty damn close. You force a smile that probably looks more like a grimace and launch into your prepared routine. A joke about a merchant, a priest, and a donkey walking into a tavern. Safe territory, nothing that could offend present company. But your voice cracks on the punchline, and the silence that follows is deafening. One of the nobles yawns, another examines her fingernails. Lord Blackwood's expression hasn't changed, which is somehow worse than if he'd frowned. Here's a quirky tidbit that might surprise you. Some desperate applicants would actually poison their competitors before auditions, slipping herbs into their ale that would make them vomit mid-performance or, in extreme cases, suffer sudden theatrical death. The competition for these positions was literally cutthroat. You're starting to understand why a sweat rolls down your back making the heavy fabric of your costume stick to your skin. Continue, the Lord says, and you're not sure if that's a good sign or if He's just enjoying watching you squirm. You pull out your juggling balls, another expensive investment that cleaned out your purse. As you toss them into the air, muscle memory takes over. 3 balls, then 4, then 5. The nobles perk up slightly. You add in a few acrobatic moves, a cartwheel here, a backflip there. Your body protests. You haven't eaten properly in days, saving every penny for this chance, but adrenaline keeps you moving. Someone in the crowd actually chuckles when you pretend to lose control, letting the balls bounce off your head in an exaggerated display of incompetence before catching them all behind your back. The thing about medieval jesters that nobody tells you is that the audition process could last for hours, sometimes days. Lords would test every aspect of your abilities: comedy, acrobatics, music, storytelling, even your capacity to withstand humiliation. You might have to perform while nobles threw food at you, maintain your composure while being insulted, or continue juggling while guards prodded you with spears, all to see if you could handle the regular working conditions of the job. Lord Blackwood raises his hand, and you freeze mid-juggle, balls clattering to the floor around your feet. "Can you sing?" he asks, and there's something predatory in his smile that makes your stomach churn. Of course you can sing. You've practiced every night for months, driving your neighbors mad with scales and silly songs. But now, with your life potentially hanging in the balance, your vocal cords feel like they've been replaced with rusty hinges. You clear your throat and launch into The Merchant's Lament, a popular tune that usually gets laughs. But halfway through the second verse, Lord Blackwood cuts you off again. "No, no, sing something about Sir Garrett there." He points to a massive knight whose face looks like it was carved from granite and left out in bad weather. "Make it funny." This is the nightmare scenario every aspiring jester fears: improvisation under threat of death. Sir Garrett's hand moves to his sword hilt, a not-so-subtle reminder that insulting the wrong person could end with your head decorating a pike. You scramble for something clever, but safe, settling on a ditty about his legendary strength and questionable table manners. The knight's face darkens with each verse, but Lord Blackwood laughs, and that's all that matters. You're learning the first crucial lesson of jester survival. Your audience is never the person you're mocking. It's the person who signs your death warrant. "Tell me," Lord Blackwood leans forward, "what makes you think you can handle being my fool? The last 3 couldn't manage it." He doesn't elaborate on what "couldn't manage it" means, but the dried blood stain on the floor near your feet provides a hint. You swallow hard and give the answer you've rehearsed. You're quick-witted, flexible, musical, and most importantly, you know when to shut up. That last part gets an approving nod from several nobles. The mainstream historical fact is that court jesters had one of the highest job-related death rates of any medieval profession, higher than soldiers, higher than plague doctors, even higher than royal food tasters. At least soldiers knew who their enemies were. "Demonstrate your wit, then," a lady in elaborate headdress calls out. "Make us laugh about the French." Ah, safe territory again. Mocking the French is always acceptable in an English court. You launch into a routine about French knights being more concerned with their hair than their honor, throwing in some exaggerated accent work that gets genuine chuckles. You're building momentum now, reading the room, adjusting your performance based on every smirk and eye roll. But then Lord Blackwood throws you a curveball. Now mock me. The hall goes silent. Even the servants stop their bustling. This is a test, obviously. But what's the right answer? Mock him too harshly, and you're dead. Too gently, and you're useless. You take a deep breath and craft a joke about his legendary generosity, how he's so generous he gives his enemies a quick death instead of a slow one. It's risky, dancing right on the edge of flattery and insult. For a moment, his face is unreadable. Then he bursts into laughter, and the entire hall exhales collectively. You'll do, he declares. And just like that, you're hired. But don't celebrate yet. You've just signed up for one of the most dangerous jobs in medieval Europe. Historians still argue whether more jesters died from execution or from accidents during performances, but the records show that the average career span was less than 3 years. One contemporary account describes finding a jester's body at the bottom of a castle well with a note pinned to his costume. He should have juggled better. The quirky historical tidbit that most people don't know: some lords would hire multiple jesters and pit them against each other in comedy death matches, literally. The winner kept the job, the loser. Well, let's just say medieval humor was a lot darker than what you'd find at your local comedy club. You're led away to be fitted for your official costume, trying not to think about how many previous owners it might have had. Your new quarters are a joke themselves, a cramped space barely bigger than a closet, tucked under the stairs where you can hear every footstep above. The previous jester's belongings are still there, including a journal that stops mid-sentence. Today, Lord Blackwood seemed particularly irritable about. The rest of the page is torn away, leaving only a suspicious brown stain. As you lie on the straw mattress that night, bells still attached, because you're not allowed to remove them even for sleep. You wonder if you've made a terrible mistake. The coins they've promised, when they remember to pay you, might keep you fed. But at what cost? Tomorrow you'll begin your real education in staying alive while making people laugh. The constant performance anxiety is already setting in, a cold knot in your stomach that will become your constant companion. You can hear laughter from the great hall above, where nobles feast and drink without you. As a jester, you're entertainment, not a guest. You exist in that strange liminal space between servant and confidant, neither truly trusted nor completely dismissed. Tomorrow you'll learn exactly what that means, but tonight, all you can do is try to sleep while your bells jingle softly with every breath, a metallic lullaby for your new life of perpetual performance. The first real day on the job starts with Sir Garrett's meaty fist connecting with your ribs, sending you sprawling across the great hall's rush-covered floor. The nobles erupt in laughter as you gasp for air, trying to remember if this was the punchline to your joke about his mother or just his way of saying good morning. "Dance, fool," someone shouts, and you scramble to your feet, ribs screaming, because lying there too long might invite worse treatment. You launch into a clumsy jig, exaggerating your pain for comic effect while internally cataloging what might be bruised or broken. This is your reality now. Physical abuse isn't just tolerated, it's expected entertainment. The mainstream historical fact that scholars have documented extensively is that jesters were often subjected to violence that would be considered torture by today's standards, all in the name of amusement. Your predecessor's journal, which you've been secretly reading, mentions losing 3 teeth in his first month and considering it getting off easy. Lady Catherine, the Earl's teenage daughter, decides your dancing isn't energetic enough and throws her wine goblet at your head. You dodge, but not too well. Letting it clip your shoulder makes her feel powerful, and the crowd laugh harder. The wine soaks through your motley, staining the yellow fabric pink. You'll be wearing that stain for weeks because you only have one costume, and washing it means perseforming naked, which Lord Blackwood finds hilarious, but which usually results in more bruises from thrown objects. "Tell us a riddle while you dance," Lord Blackwood commands. Already drunk, though it's barely past noon, you comply, hopping on one foot while reciting something about a creature with 4 legs in the morning, 2 at midday, and 3 in the evening. But before you can finish, his nephew trips you with an outstretched boot, sending you crashing into a serving girl carrying a tray of hot soup. The scalding liquid splashes across your arm, and you bite your tongue to keep from crying out. Showing real pain breaks the illusion, and breaking the illusion can be fatal. Here's a quirky detail from Jester history. Some fools would actually pad their costumes with dried grass or wool scraps, not for warmth, but as armor against the constant beatings. Of course, this made them look even more ridiculous, which just invited more abuse. You're starting to understand why your predecessor's journal entries became increasingly desperate toward the end. One entry simply reads, 17th concussion this year, seeing double, crowd loved it. The physical abuse comes in waves throughout the day. During lunch, you're required to sit at Lord Blackwood's feet like a dog, catching food scraps in your mouth while nobles take turns kicking you accidentally under the table. Your shins are already purple with bruises, and it's only been a week. During the afternoon's entertainment, you're volunteered for a demonstration of the castle's new thumbscrews. Don't worry, we'll only turn them a little. The torturer assures you with a wink that suggests otherwise. Historians still argue whether the position of court jester was actually a form of socially sanctioned sadism, allowing nobles to inflict violence on someone who couldn't fight back without consequences. The evidence certainly points that way. You've already learned to gauge the mood of the room like a farmer reads weather. Lord Blackwood's left eye twitches before he gets violent. Lady Catherine plays with her rings when she's planning something cruel, and Sir Garrett cracks his knuckles exactly 3 times before he strikes. The evening brings fresh horrors. During dinner, you're made to stand on your hands while reciting poetry, blood rushing to your head until you can barely see. When you finally collapse, Sir Garrett helps you up by grabbing your bells and yanking, nearly strangling you with your own costume. The crowd finds this so amusing, they make you do it again and again, until you're seeing stars and tasting copper. But the worst part isn't the physical pain, it's the anticipation. Every time you enter a room, you're scanning for threats. Every laugh could be the prelude to violence. Every compliment might be setting you up for a harder fall. You develop a constant flinch, a protective hunch to your shoulders that makes you look even more ridiculous, which of course invites more abuse. It's a perfectly designed cycle of humiliation. Late that night, nursing a split lip and what's definitely a cracked rib, you add your own entry to the journal, beginning to understand why jesters rarely live to old age. It's not the jokes that kill you, it's the punchlines. You try to find a comfortable position to sleep, but every movement sends fresh waves of pain through your battered body. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again, pretending the bruises are part of the costume, that the limp adds to your character. The bells on your cap chime softly as you shift, trying to find a position that doesn't hurt. They sound almost mocking now, a constant reminder that you're not a person anymore. You're a living prop, a breathing punching bag, dressed in bright colors to make the violence more palatable. You think about running, but where would you go? A runaway jester is easy to spot, and the punishment for abandoning your post doesn't bear thinking about. As sleep finally takes you, you dream of a world where laughter doesn't leave bruises, where jokes don't end with broken bones. But when morning comes, Sir Garrett's boot will find your ribs again, and you'll dance and smile and pretend it's all part of the show, because that's what jesters do. They suffer so others can feel superior, bleed so nobles can laugh, break so the powerful can feel whole. Your stomach growls so loudly during morning prayers that Father Benedict pauses his Latin chanting to glare at you. The nobles snicker, but you're too hungry to care about maintaining character. It's been 2 days since you've had anything more substantial than the moldy bread crust Lady Catherine threw at your head yesterday, and that barely counts as food when you had to dodge 3 more goblets to retrieve it. The feast table stretches before you like a cruel mirage, roasted capons glistening with fat, fresh bread still steaming from the ovens, wheels of cheese, honeyed fruits, meat pies with golden crusts. The smells make your mouth water and your empty stomach clench painfully. But you're not allowed to eat until the nobles are finished, and then only whatever scraps they decide to toss your way. Sometimes they forget entirely, too drunk on wine and their own importance to remember the colorful fool performing for crumbs. You juggle wooden pins while eyeing a particularly juicy piece of mutton on Sir Garrett's plate. He notices your gaze and deliberately drops the meat on the floor, grinding it under his boot before whistling for you like you're a dog. Fetch, fool. The court explodes in laughter as you drop to your knees, pretending to sniff around his feet while actually trying to find any salvageable morsel. Your fingers find a piece that's only partially crushed, and you pop it in your mouth before anyone can stop you, mud and all. The mainstream historical fact that often gets glossed over in romanticized accounts is that court jesters were typically paid in room, board, and the promise of food, promises that were frequently broken. Your official wage is 3 pennies a week when Lord Blackwood remembers to pay it, which isn't enough to buy a single decent meal in the castle town. You're entirely dependent on the scraps and charity of people who view you as barely more human than the hunting hounds. Today's breakfast entertainment involves you standing on your head while the nobles eat. Blood rushes to your skull, making you dizzy, but at least this position puts you at prime scrap-catching height. Lady Catherine's new lapdog gets fed choice bits of bacon while you perform, and you try not to feel envious of a creature that probably eats better than you do. When a piece of bread accidentally falls from the table, you have to resist the urge to break character and lunge for it. Instead, you work it into your routine, doing an elaborate tumbling sequence that just happens to end with the bread in your hand. Here's a quirky detail from medieval records. Some jesters would actually train rats to steal food for them, creating elaborate hidden networks in the castle walls where they'd hoard whatever their tiny accomplices could pilfer. One jester's quarters were discovered to contain over 50 pounds of stolen grain, cheese rinds, and dried meat strips. He'd been surviving on rat-delivered rations for months while performing starvation for the court's amusement. By midday, your hands shake so badly from hunger that you can barely maintain your juggling. Lord Blackwood notices and finds it hilarious, demanding you attempt increasingly difficult tricks with your trembling fingers. When you inevitably drop a pin, it becomes an excuse to deny you even the usual scraps. Clumsy fools don't deserve to eat, he declares, and the court murmurs agreement like it's profound wisdom instead of casual cruelty. Historians still argue whether the deliberate starvation of jesters was a control mechanism or simple neglect, but the result was the same: malnourished entertainers who could barely perform but had to pretend their suffering was all part of the act. Your predecessor's journal mentions eating candle wax when desperate, chewing leather straps from old armor, even attempting to catch and cook the castle's pigeons before being whipped and beaten for stealing his lordship's birds. Dinner brings fresh torment. You're made to balance on one foot throughout the entire meal, switching only when given permission. Your empty stomach cramps violently, and you can feel yourself swaying. When you finally collapse, a full hour into this torture, Lord Blackwood magnanimously allows you to eat, but only if you do it without using your hands, face down in a bowl like an animal. The humiliation burns almost as much as the hunger, but you comply. The thin gruel tastes like ambrosia after days of nothing. The other servants pity you, sometimes. The kitchen maids might slip you a heel of bread when no one's looking, or the stable boys share their rough porridge. But they're careful. Being too kind to the jester can mark them as targets for noble amusement. You've learned to accept these tiny kindnesses quickly and quietly, stuffing food into your costume's hidden pockets for later. Your bells jingle with the weight of hoarded crumbs. Tonight, you lie in your cramped quarters and take inventory of your secret stash: 2 wizened apples, a handful of nuts pilfered from the Christmas decorations, and half a meat pie that a sympathetic cook claimed was dropped and unfit for noble consumption. It's more than you've had in weeks, and you ration it carefully, knowing that tomorrow might bring another day of performed starvation. You've lost so much weight that your costume hangs loose, which Lord Blackwood finds endlessly entertaining. He makes jokes about his disappearing fool and wonders aloud if you'll simply blow away one day. You laugh along, of course, even as your ribs show through the thin fabric and your cheeks hollow out. This is the price of bells and motley, dancing on an empty stomach, smiling through hunger pangs, pretending that starvation is just another part of the show. The wrong word slips out during your noon performance, a casual observation that Lord Blackwood's new tax policy sounds remarkably similar to highway robbery, and suddenly the laughter stops. The great hall falls silent, except for your bells, which seem to ring louder in the absence of mirth. Lord Blackwood's face darkens like a storm cloud, and you realize you've just crossed an invisible line that might end with your head on a spike. What did you say, fool? His voice is dangerously quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes violence. You scramble to transform your political observation into something harmless, babbling about how robbers at least have the decency to wear masks while lords show their faces proudly. It's weak, desperately weak, but Lady Catherine titters nervously, and others follow suit. The moment passes, but you've learned a valuable lesson. In the maze of court politics, every joke is a potential death sentence. Court intrigue swirls around you like poisoned wine. You're privy to conversations nobles have in front of you, forgetting or not caring that the fool has ears. Last week, you overheard Sir Garrett plotting with two other knights about dealing with Lord Blackwood's cousin, who has a stronger claim to certain lands. Yesterday, Lady Catherine whispered to her handmaiden about her affair with a visiting duke. Information flows past you like a river, and you must pretend to be too stupid to swim. The mainstream historical fact that most people don't realize is that court jesters often served as unofficial spies, selling information to the highest bidder or using it for their own survival. But this was incredibly dangerous. Knowing too much was often more fatal than knowing too little. Your predecessor's journal contains increasingly paranoid entries about what he'd overheard, ending with a cryptic note: "The walls have ears, but fools have shorter lifespans than walls." Was today, the Earl of Westford visits with his retinue, and the political tension is thick enough to cut. He and Lord Blackwood despise each other over some ancient land dispute, but protocol demands hospitality. You're commanded to perform for both parties, walking a tightrope between entertaining Westford without insulting your master and mocking Westford without starting a war. Every joke must be calculated, every gesture measured. One misplaced jest about Westford's famously ugly daughter, and you might spark a conflict that kills thousands. Here's a quirky detail from historical records. Some jesters developed elaborate codes and double meanings in their routines, allowing them to pass messages between rival factions while appearing to tell simple jokes. One famous fool supposedly prevented a war by encoding a peace proposal in a bawdy song about a miller's daughter. Of course, when these codes were discovered, the jesters usually died in extraordinarily creative ways. During the feast, you notice Lord Blackwood's food taster sampling from the wrong plate, a simple mistake, or something more sinister. You work this observation into your routine, a silly song about confused servants mixing up their duties. Lord Blackwood laughs and switches plates with his wife, just to be safe. Later, when the original plate is fed to the dogs and one starts convulsing, he looks at you with new interest. You've just saved his life while pretending to be an idiot, and now he knows you're more observant than you appear. This knowledge makes you valuable and dangerous. Historians still argue whether jesters were political players or just pawns, but the truth varies with each fool. You're learning to navigate these treacherous waters by playing everyone's fool and no one's friend. When Lady Catherine tries to recruit you to carry messages to her lover, you agree enthusiastically, then accidentally deliver them to the wrong duke entirely. When Sir Garrett offers you gold to report on Lord Blackwood's private conversations, you take the money and report only harmless gossip everyone already knows. The game gets more complex when Lord Blackwood calls you to his private chambers one night. "I know you're not as stupid as you pretend," he says bluntly. "I want you to watch the Earl of Westford's Jester, report back what he says, what he notices, who he speaks with. You're now a spy spying on another spy, both pretending to be fools while dancing around deadly secrets. The irony isn't lost on you or on Lord Blackwood, who actually smiles at the absurdity. Your position becomes even more precarious when you accidentally witness Lady Blackwood meeting secretly with a hooded figure who hands her a vial of clear liquid. Poison, medicine, love potion, you'll never know, because acknowledging you saw anything would mark you for death. Instead, you incorporate more jokes about blind fools who see nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. The lady rewards your discretion with extra scraps at dinner, a silent bargain sealed in bread and silence. Late at night, you update the journal with careful, coded entries. Nothing too obvious. You've learned from your predecessor's mistakes. But someday another fool might need to know which nobles can be trusted. None. Which secrets are safe to joke about? Very few. And which political currents will drag you under if you're not careful? Most of them. You're not just a jester anymore. You're a navigator in a sea of poisoned daggers, where every laugh could be your last. The bells on your cap feel heavier now, weighted with secrets that could topple kingdoms or just topple you into an early grave. Tomorrow you'll wake up and pretend again. Pretend to be stupid. Pretend to be harmless. Pretend you don't notice the subtle shift in alliances, or the new poison taster who looks suspiciously like an assassin. Because in this Game of Thrones, the fool's role is to know everything while knowing nothing, and the penalty for breaking character is death. You smell like a latrine and dress like a peacock, which perfectly summarizes your social standing, somewhere between the castle's waste and its decoration. The merchant's children throw mud at you in the market square, while their parents smile approvingly. After all, you're just the fool, barely more respectable than the town drunk and significantly less human than their donkeys. At least donkeys serve a practical purpose. The isolation hits hardest during castle celebrations. Last night's wedding feast saw you performing for 6 hours straight while nobles danced with their partners, clinked goblets with friends, whispered sweet nothings to lovers. You stood alone in the center of it all, a brightly colored island of loneliness in a sea of human connection. When young Lord Edmund tried to thank you for a particularly clever riddle, his father yanked him away. "We don't converse with the help," he scolded, as if your foolishness might be contagious. Your quarters reflect your status. That cramped closet under the stairs, or even rats seem embarrassed to visit. The mainstream historical fact that often gets overlooked is that jesters occupied a unique social position, too valuable to dismiss, but too degraded to accept. You exist in a perpetual state of social purgatory, neither servant nor noble, neither friend nor enemy, just a living piece of furniture that happens to tell jokes. The servants avoid you because associating with the fool brings unwanted noble attention. The stable boy who shared his bread with you last week got assigned to mucking out the pigsties after Sir Garrett saw you talking. The kitchen maid who smiled at your joke found herself scrubbing chamber pots for a month. Message received. Kindness to the jester carries a price few are willing to pay. But it's worse with the nobles, who treat you like a pet that's learned amusing tricks. Lady Catherine calls you it instead of he, as in, make it dance again, father. Lord Blackwood introduces you to visiting dignitaries as my creature, like you're some exotic animal he's captured. You're expected to be grateful for this dehumanization, to bow and scrape and thank them for the privilege of being their living toy. Here's a quirky historical detail. Some jesters would actually develop imaginary friends to cope with the isolation, holding full conversations with invisible companions during performances. The nobles found this hilarious, not realizing they were watching a man's sanity crumble in real time. Your predecessor's journal mentions Sir Nobody, an invisible knight he'd consult for advice. The entries about Sir Nobody become increasingly elaborate and disturbing as the isolation deepened. The loneliness manifests in strange ways. You find yourself talking to your reflection in puddles, practicing conversations you'll never have with people who'll never see you as human. You name the spiders in your quarters and feel genuine grief when one disappears. You create elaborate backstories for the bells on your cap, imagining they're tiny prisoners like yourself, forced to sing for their supper. Historians still argue whether the social isolation of jesters was deliberate policy or natural consequence. But the effect was the same. You become a non-person, existing only when summoned to perform. Between performances, you're expected to simply not exist, to vanish into your cramped quarters and wait, like a toy placed back in its box. The few times you venture into town on errands, the isolation follows. Merchants charge you double, fool tax. They call it with a sneer. The tavern keeper serves you in the alley behind his establishment because decent folk don't want to drink near the castle fool. Even the beggars seem to look down on you. At least they chose their position. You sold your dignity for 3 pennies a week and the promise of regular beatings. You try to maintain some semblance of human connection through your performances, encoding real emotions in fake jokes, genuine observations in silly songs. But the audience doesn't want the real you. They want the cartoon, the caricature, the thing that exists solely for their amusement. When you accidentally let slip something genuine, a moment of real sadness during a ballad, authentic frustration in a jest, Lord Blackwood frowns. Less feeling, more fooling, he commands. The other castle fools you meet during noble gatherings understand. but you're all too paranoid to form real friendships. Any alliance between jesters might be seen as a conspiracy, so you exchange knowing looks across crowded halls, professional nods that acknowledged a shared suffering without risking deeper connection. You're all drowning alone in rooms full of people. At night, the isolation becomes a physical weight pressing on your chest. You lie in your closet room, listening to the sounds of low above, servants gossiping, nobles laughing, real humans living real lives. You're so desperate for connection that you've started leaving crumbs for the mice, just to have something visit you by choice rather than command. The mice, at least, don't care about your bells. You realize you're slowly forgetting who you were before the motley. Your real name feels foreign on your tongue when you whisper it in the darkness. Your memories of life before feel like stories someone else told you. The costume isn't just clothing anymore, it's becoming your skin, the bells your bones. You're transforming into exactly what they want, a thing that exists only to amuse, without history, without future, without the inconvenient humanity that might make their cruelty feel cruel. Tomorrow you'll perform happiness for people who ensure you'll never truly feel it. You'll pretend to have friends in a castle where friendship with you is forbidden. You'll joke about love to nobles who see you as incapable of the emotion, and you'll do it all with a smile, because that's what fools do. They perform connection for people who guarantee their isolation. One bell jingled jest at a time. The bells never stop, even in your dreams. They chime with every movement, a metallic symphony that's driving you slowly mad. Your costume weighs 40 pounds, 20 pounds of layered wool and cotton, 5 pounds of bells, and another 15 of padding you've added to survive the daily beatings. In summer, you're a walking furnace, sweat pooling in places you didn't know could sweat. In winter, the bells freeze to your skin, leaving tiny frost burns that never quite heal. Lord Blackwood insists your costume must be visible from across the great hall, so the colors are eye-searing, blood red and sunshine yellow in a diagonal pattern that makes you dizzy if you look down too long. The pointed cap extends 2 feet above your head, topped with 3 large bells that ring constantly. Smaller bells line your collar, cuffs, and hem, 27 in total, each with a slightly different tone. You've memorized their individual sounds, given them names, because when you're slowly losing your mind, why not befriend your tormentors? The mainstream historical fact people forget is that jester costumes weren't just clothing. They were carefully designed instruments of humiliation. The cut forces you to move in exaggerated ways just to maintain balance. The fabric is coarse against your skin, leaving rashes that never heal because you can't remove the outfit except for your monthly bath. Yes, monthly. If you're lucky, your mask is the worst part. Not a physical mask, but the painted face Lord Blackwood requires. White lead paste as a base, you know it's poisonous. Everyone knows it's poisonous, but noble aesthetic demands override fool safety. Red mercury sulfide for the lips and cheeks, leaving a metallic taste that never fades. The makeup cracks and flakes throughout the day, getting in your eyes, your mouth, your food when you're allowed any. You're literally painting yourself to death, one performance at a time. The shoes deserve their own particular mention in this catalog of misery. Pointed toes that curl up and back, attached to your ankles with leather straps, because otherwise you'd trip with every step. They're called poulaines, and they make walking feel like a controlled fall. The bells on the toe tips ensure that even your footsteps are performative. You can't sneak, can't run, can't do anything without announcing your presence like a walking alarm. Here's a quirky detail from medieval records. Some jesters would stuff their pointed shoes with dried beans or pebbles to create different sounds when they walked, turning their very movement into percussion. Of course, after hours of performance, those beans and pebbles would grind into the soft parts of your feet, leaving bruises that looked like purple constellations. Your predecessor's journal mentions losing 3 toenails to shoe-related injuries in a single month. The costume never comes off completely. During your monthly bath, you're allowed to remove everything except the bells. Those stay attached to leather straps around your wrists and ankles. So you don't forget what you are. As Lord Blackwood so kindly explained, you sleep in a lighter version of your outfit because being caught out of costume means punishment. One morning you overslept and rushed to the hall without your cap. The subsequent beating left you unable to perform acrobatics for a week, which earned you another beating for laziness. Historians still argue whether the elaborate discomfort of jester costumes was intentional torture or merely callous indifference. But from inside this woolen prison, the distinction feels academic. Your skin hasn't breathed properly in months. You've developed sores where the bells straps rub, infections where the wool traps moisture, and a permanent hunch from the weight of your cap. But pointing out these medical concerns would break character, and breaking character means breaking bones. The washing situation compounds every other misery. Your costume gets cleaned when Lord Blackwood remembers to order it, which is roughly never. You're a walking collection of stains. Wine from dodged goblets, food from successful catches, blood from unsuccessful dodges, and things you'd rather not identify. The smell is unique. You've noticed servants holding their breath when you pass, and even the castle dogs keep their distance. But here's the truly insidious part. You're starting to feel naked without it. On the rare occasions when you can remove pieces for repair, you feel exposed, vulnerable. The weight has become familiar. The bell's a part of your body's rhythm. You catch yourself swaying even when standing still, unconsciously maintaining the jingle that's become your heartbeat. The costume isn't just clothing anymore. It's a prison you're forgetting you want to escape. The other jesters at noble gatherings compare costume horrors like soldiers comparing war wounds. One fool from the northern castles has bells surgically attached to his earlobes. Another's costume includes a full face mask that he's only allowed to remove for eating. You're all slowly being transformed into living cartoons, human beings disappearing inside increasingly elaborate shells of humiliation. Tonight, as you try to find a sleeping position that doesn't ring your bells or aggravate your rashes, you wonder if you even remember what your own skin looks like under all this fabric. The costume has become your identity so completely that you're not sure who you'd be without it. Would anyone recognize you in normal clothes Would you recognize yourself? The bells chime softly as you breathe, a lullaby of captivity that follows you even into sleep. In your dreams, you're still wearing the costume, still jangling with every movement. Sometimes you dream of silence, of stillness, of clothes that don't announce your every breath. But then you wake, and the bells greet you like old enemies, ready for another day of performed madness, wrapped in 40 pounds of scratchy, stinking, soul-crushing fabric. The smiling is killing you, not metaphorically, literally. Your face aches constantly from the mandatory grin that must never falter, muscles locked in a rictus of false joy that would make a corpse jealous. Lord Blackwood decreed that his fool must always appear happy. So you smile through beatings, smile through starvation, smile while watching executions. Your cheeks have developed permanent creases, and sometimes you wake up still smiling, your jaw locked in position from hours of performed mirth. Today's torture is especially exquisite. Lord Blackwood's eldest son died yesterday in a hunting accident, and the castle is draped in mourning black. Yet you must still perform, still jest, still smile. Death stops for no fool, his lordship declared through his grief, though what he really means is that his need for distraction outweighs any consideration for human decency. So you juggle at a funeral, tell riddles during the burial, and grin like a madman while everyone else weeps. The mainstream historical fact that often gets sanitized is that jesters were frequently forced to perform during the most inappropriate moments, deaths, disasters, even during torture sessions. Your professional ancestors danced while cities burned, joked while plagues ravaged, and maintained their painted smiles while their own families died. The psychological toll was devastating, creating what medieval physicians called the fool's madness, though they never connected it to the obvious cause. Your mind has developed interesting coping mechanisms. You've discovered you can split yourself in two: the outer fool who smiles and performs, and the inner person who screams. During particularly brutal days, you retreat so far into this inner self that you watch your body perform from a distance, like a puppet operated by invisible strings. The dissociation is probably unhealthy, but it's better than the alternative, actually feeling everything that happens to you. The nights are worst. When the performance finally ends and you're alone in your closet room, the smile won't turn off. Your face muscles have forgotten how to relax. You lie there grinning at the ceiling, tears rolling down your cheeks while your mouth stays frozen in joy. Your predecessor's journal mentions this phenomenon. The smile becomes a scar that never heals. I fear I'll die grinning, and hell will think I'm happy to be there. Here's a quirky detail from medieval records. Some jesters would use hemlock paste to partially paralyze their facial muscles, making the constant smile easier to maintain. Of course, hemlock is poison, and the dosage was always a gamble. Too little and it didn't work, too much and you'd die with that final smile frozen forever on your face. Several court records mention finding dead jesters who looked disturbingly pleased with their demise. The psychological fracturing shows in other ways. You've developed multiple performance personalities. Jolly Jack for regular entertainment, Witty William for political situations, and Sad Samuel for when Lord Blackwood wants to feel better about his own misery by watching yours. You switch between them like changing masks, each with their own voice, mannerisms, and catalog of appropriate jokes. Sometimes you forget which one you are when you're alone. Historians still argue whether the mental health crisis among medieval jesters was endemic or exaggerated, but the evidence is clear in the records. Suicide rates among fools were astronomical. Your predecessor's predecessor apparently walked into the moat wearing full costume, bells ringing underwater until the bubbles stopped. The one before that hung himself with his own bell straps, leaving a note that said only, "The joke's on me." The constant cognitive dissonance is eroding your sanity like water on stone. You must be stupid but clever, worthless but entertaining, invisible but always present. You're required to mock the powerful while being powerless, speak truths through lies, and find humor in horror. Your mind twists itself into knots, trying to maintain these contradictions, and sometimes you feel the threads snapping. Last week, you found yourself laughing at a public flogging, not performing laughter, but genuinely amused by the absurdity of it all. The crowd thought it was part of your act, but you were simply breaking, finding honest hilarity in horror because what else is left? When everything is a joke, nothing is. And when nothing matters, everything becomes equally amusing. You're developing the fool's madness, and the worst part is you can feel it happening. The other castle servants whisper about your predecessor's final days, how he started seeing invisible audiences, performing for empty rooms, how he'd hold conversations with his reflection, arguing about who was the real fool, how he began mixing his stage personas, telling death jokes at weddings and marriage jokes at executions. They found him one morning in the great hall, performing for chairs he'd arranged like an audience, stone cold dead, but still smiling. You understand now why he named his invisible friend Sir Nobody. It's easier to fracture than face the reality of what you've become. So you smile through another day, joke through another beating, and feel another piece of your sanity chip away like paint from your poisonous mask. The bells ring, the nobles laugh, and somewhere deep inside, the real you screams in a voice only you can hear. Tonight, you write in the journal with shaking hands. The smile has eaten my face. I see myself in mirrors and don't recognize the grinning stranger. How many more jokes before I disappear entirely? How many more smiles before there's nothing left but the fool? You already know the answer, but you smile anyway, because that's what fools do. They grin their way to madness, one mandatory laugh at a time. The new Lord Blackwood makes his father look like a kindly grandfather. Young Edward inherited the title last month when the old lord choked on a fishbone. You were performing at the time, and some whispered it was your fault for making him laugh mid-swallow. Now his son sits on the throne with the casual cruelty of youth mixed with the absolute power of nobility, and your already precarious position has become a daily dance with death. I never liked you, Edward announces on his first day as Lord, studying you like a butcher evaluating meat. Father's tastes were antiquated, I prefer my entertainment more interactive. By interactive, he means participatory torture. Within a week, you're not just telling jokes but becoming the punchline to increasingly sadistic games. The new Lord's friends take turns fool baiting, seeing who can provoke the biggest reaction while you maintain your smile. The mainstream historical fact that genealogists have documented is that Jester positions rarely survived succession. New lords wanted their own fools, their own style of entertainment, their own victims. The lucky jesters were simply dismissed. The unlucky ones, well, medieval castles had many deep wells and high towers, and accidents were so tragically common. Your predecessor's journal, which you've now memorized, contains an entire section titled Survival Through Succession. His advice is bleak. Become indispensable or become invisible. There is no middle ground. But Edward has made it clear he finds you very dispensable indeed. Yesterday, he casually mentioned interviewing new fools, making sure you could hear. The message is clear. Your days are numbered unless you can prove your worth in ways that appeal to his darker tastes. The game changes entirely when Edward discovers your literacy. You'd hidden this skill carefully. Literate fools were often suspected of spying, but he catches you glancing at a letter on his desk. Instead of anger, his eyes light up with malicious glee. A reading fool? How novel! Tell me, can you write as well? Your hesitant nod seals your fate. Now you're not just entertainment, but a secretary for his cruel correspondence, writing mocking letters to rival lords in your own hand so he can deny authorship if needed. Here's a quirky detail from succession records. Some jesters would deliberately maim themselves during succession periods, reasoning that a damaged fool might inspire pity or at least be seen as not worth the effort of killing. One famous case involved a jester who cut off his own thumb, claiming it was a juggling accident. The new lord kept him on out of morbid fascination, though he required the fool to wear the severed digit on a chain as part of his costume. Edward's innovations in cruelty are almost impressive. He's instituted Fool's Friday, where you must survive whatever torments the court can devise. Last week involved walking across hot coals while reciting poetry. This week, you're forced to insult each noble in turn, knowing they'll remember every word when it's time for their revenge. The psychological torture of forced aggression against people who already despise you is exquisite. Historians still argue whether the high turnover rate of jesters during succession was murder or suicide. But from where you're standing, the distinction feels academic. You've already planned 17 different escape routes, each more desperate than the last. The moat looks inviting some nights. At least the fish would appreciate the bells. But then Edward makes a mistake. In his youth and arrogance, he offends a visiting bishop, mocking the church's wealth while drunk. The bishop demands satisfaction, threatening excommunication. Suddenly, Edward needs someone to take the blame, someone who could plausibly have spoken out of turn, someone like a fool known for inappropriate jokes. You see your chance and take it, falling on your sword with elaborate theatricality, claiming the words were yours, performed without permission. The bishop accepts this fiction, barely, but now Edward owes you, not gratitude, never that, but a stay of execution at least. You've bought yourself time by becoming useful in a new way, as a scapegoat. It's a dangerous game, taking blame for noble mistakes, but it's better than the alternative. Your predecessor's journal mentioned this strategy. Better a living dog than a dead lion, and better a blamed fool than a buried one. Still, you know this reprieve is temporary. Edward's friends still compete to see who can make you break character first. His new wife finds you depressing and lobbies for a younger, prettier fool. The castle staff, sensing which way the wind blows, have stopped even their small kindnesses. You're a dead man walking, and everyone knows it, except for the date of execution. You spend your nights updating the journal for the next poor soul, adding sections on navigating new management and creative scapegoating for survival. Your hands shake as you write, knowing that each entry might be your last. The bells seem louder now, counting down time you don't have. Tomorrow, Lord Edward interviews a new fool, a young acrobat from the southern provinces who can supposedly juggle flaming swords. You'll watch from your position, smiling as always, knowing you're training your replacement. The only question is whether you'll leave your post vertically or horizontally. But tonight, you're still the fool, still breathing, still smiling through the countdown to your obsolescence. Because that's what jesters do. They perform their own extinction with perfect comic timing. The summons comes at 3 in the morning, bells ringing through the castle's corridors as guards drag you from your straw mattress. Lord Edward has insomnia and demands entertainment. You stumble through dark hallways, still half asleep, trying to force your face into the mandatory smile, while your brain struggles to remember which day it is, which jokes you've already told this week, which nobleman you're supposed to avoid eye contact with after yesterday's unfortunate incident with the chamber pot. Your body moves on autopilot. It knows the routine better than your conscious mind. Bow precisely 45 degrees, no more or less. Jingle the bells in the specific pattern Edward prefers. Launch into the opening joke before he can change his mind about wanting entertainment and decide he'd prefer an execution instead. You perform through the haze of exhaustion, words tumbling from your mouth while your mind floats somewhere near the ceiling. The mainstream historical fact that labor historians have documented is that jesters were among the earliest examples of what we'd now call gig economy workers. No set hours, no overtime pay, no concept of work-life balance. You're essentially on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, expected to be brilliant and amusing at a moment's notice regardless of illness, exhaustion, or personal crisis. Last Tuesday, you performed through a fever so high you were hallucinating. The nobles thought your rambling about dancing shadows and melting walls was a new type of comedy. You received extra scraps that night for innovation. Thursday brought food poisoning from spoiled meat, but you juggled between bouts of vomiting, incorporating your illness into the act. Even my stomach knows better jokes than Lord Westford, you quipped, before rushing to the garderobe again. The sleep deprivation has become its own form of torture. You average 3 hours of rest on good nights, less when Edward is feeling particularly cruel or particularly bored. Your predecessor's journal mentions developing the ability to sleep standing up, micro naps between jokes. You've mastered this skill out of necessity, catching seconds of rest while the nobles argue or drink. Sometimes you wake up mid-performance, unsure how long you've been talking or what you've said. Here's a quirky detail from medieval medical texts. Some court physicians theorized that jesters required less sleep than normal humans, being creatures of unnatural vigor. This convenient fiction allowed nobles to work their fools literally to death without guilt. One recorded case describes a jester who performed for 72 hours straight during a wedding celebration, finally collapsing mid-juggle. The nobles complained about the poor timing. Your health is failing in ways both obvious and subtle. The constant stress has given you a tremor that makes juggling increasingly difficult, which leads to more beatings, which creates more stress. Your hair is falling out in patches, hidden under your fool's cap. You've lost teeth from poor nutrition and occasional punches. Your left eye twitches constantly, a physical manifestation of the anxiety that never leaves. But sickness isn't an excuse for poor performance. When you developed a cough last winter that produced blood-flecked phlegm, you worked it into your routine. Even my lungs are trying to escape this job. The nobles found it hilarious. When your joints swelled from the damp cold of your quarters, you exaggerated your limping into a new comedic walk. Every symptom becomes a prop, every illness an opportunity for dark humor. Historians still argue whether the life expectancy of jesters was shortened more by violence or by simple physical collapse. But the records show most didn't survive past 40. Your predecessor died at 32, described in castle records as ancient for a fool. The one before him made it to 28. You're 25 and feel 60. Each year in motley aging, you like dog years. The performance schedule is relentless. Morning entertainment during breakfast, afternoon shows in the courtyard, evening performances at dinner, late-night command performances for insomniac nobles. Between these, you're expected to wander the castle being spontaneously amusing, practice new routines, mend your costume, and somehow find time for basic human needs like eating and defecating, both of which you often have to do while maintaining character. Today brings a special horror. Lord Edward has decided you should perform during his bath. You stand in the steamy chamber, sweat mixing with the moisture as you juggle soap balls and tell jokes to a naked man who could order your death for looking at him wrong. Your costume grows heavier with humidity. The bells sound muffled and strange. When you slip on the wet floor and crash into a tub of scalding water, he laughs so hard he orders you to do it again and again. Third-degree burns are tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is surviving the encore. The other servants whisper that you're looking more corpse-like by the day. You catch glimpses of yourself in polished metal and see a skeleton wrapped in bright fabric, death dressed up as joy. Your body is eating itself, burning through reserves that were never adequate to begin with. But the show must go on, quite literally. The last jester who claimed illness was forced to perform his own funeral as a comedy exercise before they made it real. Tonight, Edward keeps you performing until dawn, a marathon session fueled by his wine and your desperation. When he finally dismisses you, the sun is rising and you have exactly 1 hour before morning performances begin again. You collapse in your closet room, still in full costume because there's no time to change. As consciousness fades, you wonder if you'll wake up and can't decide which outcome you're hoping for. The execution is scheduled for noon, and you have a front row seat. Not in the audience, you are the audience, required to stand directly beside the chopping block and provide comic commentary as Lord Blackwood's former advisor loses his head for the crime of suggesting fiscal responsibility. The blood will splatter across your motley, adding fresh stains to your costume's grotesque collection, while you crack jokes about heads rolling and neck-breaking tax policies. "Make it funny," Lord Edward commanded this morning, his eyes glittering with that particular madness that comes from absolute power mixed with absolute boredom. "I want to laugh as the blade falls." So here you stand, bells jingling in the wind, preparing material about a man you've known for 3 years who will be dead in 3 minutes. The crowd gathered in the courtyard expects a show, and you're the opening act for death. The mainstream historical fact that gets glossed over in romantic retellings is that jesters were required witnesses to virtually every horror the medieval world could produce: executions, torture sessions, floggings, all enhanced with mandatory comic accompaniment. Your predecessor's journal has an entire section labeled Death Jokes, carefully categorized by execution method: hanging jokes, burning jokes, drowning jokes, and 17 different quips about beheading. You've memorized them all. The advisor, Sir Marcus was his name, though you're not supposed to humanize the condemned, walks to the block with dignity intact. He sees you standing there and actually manages a rueful smile. "At least I'll have entertainment on my way out," he says, and you're required to respond with something witty about exit strategies while your soul shrivels a little more. The crowd laughs. They always laugh. Your job is to make death palatable, to transform horror into humor so the nobles can sleep at night. Here's a quirky detail from execution records. Some jesters developed specific personas just for executions: Gallows Grim or Headsman's Harry, complete with specialized death-themed costumes. One particularly entrepreneurial fool had bells shaped like tiny skulls that played funeral dirges when shaken. He lasted 6 months before the psychological weight drove him to request his own execution, which he reportedly narrated himself right up until the blade fell. You launch into your prepared routine as Sir Marcus kneels, making observations about how he's finally getting ahead in politics, how this is a cutting-edge solution to budget problems, how he's about to experience the ultimate weight off his shoulders. The words taste like ash, but your delivery is perfect. Lord Edward laughs. The crowd laughs. Sir Marcus closes his eyes, and you keep talking because silence might invite conscience. The blade rises. You increase your volume, your energy, your desperate performance of mirth. A joke about haircuts, another about close shaves, anything to fill the terrible pause before gravity does its work. The blade falls. The crowd gasps. You deliver your punchline with perfect timing as a human life ends 3 feet away. The blood spray catches your left side, warm and sticky, and you incorporate it into your act. Look, he's giving me a red review. Historians still argue whether forced participation in executions was meant to dehumanize the jesters or the victims, but the answer is obviously both. You're not allowed to show horror, disgust, or sympathy. Any break in character during an execution is considered treasonous if you can't find death funny. Maybe you're sympathizing with the condemned. Your predecessor wrote about developing a execution face, a specific expression that showed amusement while his eyes went dead. But it's not just the beheadings. Last month you provided entertainment during a session with the rack, making jokes about stretching the budget while a merchant screamed. 2 weeks ago, you juggled hot coals while watching a woman branded for theft, incorporating her cries into a song about the dangers of sticky fingers. Your nightmare catalog grows with each command performance, a mental gallery of horrors decorated with your forced laughter. The worst part is how good you've become at it. Your execution material is legendary among the nobility, requested specifically for the most gruesome punishments. Bring the fool, they say. He makes it bearable. You've become an anesthetic for atrocity, helping them digest horror like a spoonful of sugar with poison. Some nights you lie awake, listing the names of everyone you've helped die with a smile, wondering if they curse you from whatever comes after. Today's execution ends with the traditional display of the head. You're required to address it directly, making observations about its expression, its similarity to various vegetables, its potential as castle decoration. The crowd roars with laughter as you pretend the head is answering back in a silly voice. Sir Marcus had 3 children. They're probably watching from somewhere in the crowd, learning that their father's death is comedy, that suffering is entertainment, that jesters exist to make nightmares into jokes. You finish your routine and bow, bells ringing like funeral chimes, pretending to be celebration. Lord Edward tosses you a gold coin. Execution performances pay better, the blood premium, and you catch it with practiced ease. It's slippery with blood, Sir Marcus's blood, and you'll add it to your growing collection of coins earned from the dead. 30 pieces of silver has nothing on your hoard. Tonight you'll wash the blood from your costume, knowing it will never truly come clean. You'll update the journal with new execution jokes that worked well, adding to the legacy of horror humor for the next poor fool. And you'll try not to think about Sir Marcus's smile, or his children's faces, or the fact that one day it might be you on that block with another jester making jokes as your world ends. Because that's what fools do. They dance on graves and laugh at death until it's their turn to be the punchline. Not all jesters are created equal, and you're reminded of this brutal fact every time you catch your reflection. Your body came pre-broken, a twisted spine that makes you walk like a question mark, one leg shorter than the other, creating a perpetual stumble that nobles find endlessly amusing. God's own joke, Lord Edward calls you, and you're required to laugh along because acknowledging the cruelty would break the spell that keeps you alive. You weren't born this way. The fever came when you were 7, leaving you with legs that wouldn't grow straight and a back that curves like a boat's hull. Your parents tried everything, prayers, poultices, even a traveling miracle worker who took their last coins and left you worse than before. By 12, when it became clear you'd never work the fields or learn a trade, someone suggested the castle. They're always looking for fools, the village elder said, not unkindly. And broken toys make the best in entertainment. And the mainstream historical fact that modern histories sanitize is that many jesters were disabled individuals who had no other economic options in medieval society. Courts actively sought out people with physical differences, dwarfs, hunchbacks, those with unusual features or bodies that deviated from the norm. Your suffering was your resume, your deformity, your qualification. The more obviously different you were, the more valuable as a source of amusement. Lord Edward particularly enjoys making you race his hunting dogs across the great hall, laughing uproariously as your uneven gait sends you tumbling. Look how he scurries, he cries, clapping like a child at a puppet show. Your spine screams with each forced performance, vertebrae grinding against each other in ways that will leave you bedridden by 40 if you live that long. But you smile and scramble because the alternative is starvation or worse. Here's a quirky detail from medical texts. Some castle physicians theorized that physical deformity indicated a matching mental deficiency, making disabled jesters natural fools who couldn't truly suffer because they couldn't truly think. This convenient fiction allowed nobles to treat physically different jesters with extraordinary cruelty while believing they were simply enjoying their natural state. Your predecessor's journal rages against this lie. They think because my back is bent, my mind must be also. I let them believe it. Safer to be thought stupid than known to be suffering. The other servants avoid you with a mixture of pity and disgust. Your twisted form reminds them of their own vulnerability, how quickly illness or injury could reduce them to your state. The kitchen maids cross themselves when you pass. The stable boys throw horseshoes over their shoulders for luck. You're a walking reminder of misfortune, a breathing bad omen dressed in bells. Even among the already ostracized community of fools, you're the lowest of the low. But it's the noble children who are cruelest. Lord Edward's young sons have made a game of mimicking your walk, competing to see who can best reproduce your lurching gait. They follow you through the castle in a grotesque parade, their healthy bodies contorting in mockery of your daily struggle. When you perform, they sit in the front row and copy every movement, turning your disability into a shadow show. Their parents beam with pride at their clever imitation. Historians still argue whether disabled jesters suffered more or less than their able-bodied counterparts, but that's like asking whether drowning is worse than burning. Your twisted spine is both your curse and your job security. Lord Edward keeps you partly because disposing of you would mean finding another sufficiently amusing cripple. You're collectible in your deformity, a rare specimen in his museum of human curiosity. The physical pain is constant, a baseline of agony that spikes with each required performance. Tumbling with a curved spine feels like being broken on a wheel. Juggling when one arm hangs lower than the other requires compensations that tear muscles. Dancing on uneven legs leaves you weeping in your quarters, biting down on leather to muffle the screams. But tomorrow you'll dance again, because the show must go on and your suffering is the show. You've developed an encyclopedic knowledge of pain management, willow bark tea for the inflammation, stolen wine for the worst nights, positions that allow momentary relief. Your predecessor's journal includes detailed drawings of stretches and exercises, annotated with helps for 3 hours or makes it worse but feels good momentarily. You've added your own discoveries, creating a manual of misery management for the next broken fool. The irony isn't lost on you. In a world of suffering, yours is considered entertainment. Peasants starve, soldiers die, plague victims rot in the streets. But your particular anguish is special because it's visible, mockable, marketable. You're a luxury item, a status symbol. Lord Edward brags to visiting nobles about his collection of fools, saving you for last like a prize piece. Wait until you see this one, he says, twisted like a corkscrew, but twice as amusing. Some nights you dream of standing straight, of walking without pain, of a body that doesn't betray you with every movement. But then morning comes, and reality reasserts itself with the grinding of bone against bone. You strap on your bells, paint on your smile, and prepare for another day of performed suffering. The nobles will laugh at your lurching walk, children will mock your twisted form, and you'll pretend it's all part of the act, because that's what broken fools do. They turn their pain into punchlines, their disability into comedy gold. You're living proof that God has a sense of humor, though you suspect it's the dark kind that ends with everyone crying. But tears don't pay the bills, and neither does dignity. So you dance on twisted legs, juggle through spine spasms, and smile like suffering is the funniest joke you've ever heard. After all, if you don't laugh, you'll scream, and screaming fools don't last long. You're 32 years old and feel ancient, a relic in a profession that consumes its practitioners like fire consumes wood. Your hands shake now even when you're not performing, a permanent tremor that makes juggling an adventure in probability. The bells on your costume seem heavier each day, or maybe you're just getting weaker. Either way, Lord Edward has started referring to you as the old fool. And in this context, old means obsolete. The writing is on the wall, literally. Edward's taken to having you transcribe your own replacement notices, making you pen advertisements for a younger, more vigorous fool while maintaining your mandatory smile. He watches you write, savoring your humiliation like fine wine. Make sure to mention we need someone who can still do backflips, he adds helpfully, and whose bones don't creak louder than his bells. And the mainstream historical fact that retirement planners would find horrifying is that medieval jesters had no concept of pension, no retirement package, no golden years of rest after decades of service. You worked until you couldn't, and then you died, if you were lucky. If you were unlucky, you lingered, becoming an object lesson in the castle about the importance of staying useful. Your predecessor's journal ends with increasingly shaky handwriting. They're feeding me to the new fool as training. I'm the what not to become demonstration. Your body is a catalog of your career. Scars from thrown objects map across your skin like a violent constellation. Your ribs have been broken so many times they've given up healing properly, creating a xylophone of pain with every deep breath. 3 missing teeth from various performance accidents, chronic headaches from years of concussions, joints that predict weather better than any almanac. You're a walking medical textbook of occupational hazards, each injury with its own hilarious origin story you're required to tell on command. Here's a quirky detail from guild records. Some cities had fools' homes, charitable institutions where broken jesters could theoretically retire. In practice, these were usually just decorated death houses where former fools went to starve more slowly than on the streets. The waiting list was years long, the conditions horrific, and most residents lasted weeks, not years. Still, desperate aging jesters would dream of these places like promised lands. You've started training your replacement, whether Edward officially hires one or not. Young Tom from the kitchen has a natural wit and a desperation that reminds you of yourself 2 decades ago. You're teaching him the crucial lessons, which nobles hit hardest, which jokes are safest, how to fall without breaking bones, how to eat spoiled food without vomiting. He thinks you're being kind. You know you're just trying to ensure someone will remember you existed. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rate among aging jesters was natural or assisted, but you're living the answer. The accidents increase as your usefulness decreases. Last week, someone forgot to mention the loose floorboard that sent you tumbling downstairs. Yesterday, your food tasted oddly bitter, leaving you sick enough to miss a performance, a cardinal sin that earned public flogging. The message is clear: leave on your feet or in a box, but leave soon. The younger nobles have started a betting pool on how you'll go. William wagers on performance accident, noting how your trembling hands make juggling knives increasingly risky. Catherine favors winter fever, observing your persistent cough and thinning frame. Lord Edward himself has money on tragic fall, and you've noticed an unusual number of windows left open near where you perform. It's almost flattering, being worth gambling on one last time. Your quarters, always cramped, now feel like a tomb you're pre-inhabiting. You've started organizing your few possessions, not that there's much to arrange. The journal you'll leave for the next fool, hidden where only desperate hands will find it. A few coins saved over years, sewn into your mattress, a small carved wooden bird, a gift from a child who felt sorry for you years ago, your only possession that isn't related to foolery. Sleep comes harder now, not just from the pain, but from the dreams. You dream of all the jesters before you, a parade of broken fools extending back through history. They whisper advice, warnings, jokes that kill, and jokes that save. Sometimes you dream of after, not death exactly, but the absence of bells, the blessing of silence, the radical idea of existing without performing. Tom brings you extra bread sometimes, kindness from one fool to another. You try to warn him off this life, but he's young and desperate and believes he'll be different. They all believe they'll be different. You were going to revolutionize the profession, bring new dignity to the role, survive through cleverness where others failed through weakness. Now you can barely survive through breakfast. The end is coming, and part of you welcomes it. Not suicide, that's the coward's exit. And despite everything, you have a fool's pride. But when Lord Edward suggests increasingly dangerous stunts, you don't protest as much. When the new fool arrives for his audition, you help him prepare, knowing you're training your executioner. When you cough blood into your sleeve, you don't seek the physician. Tonight, you write what might be your last journal entry. To whoever reads this, I survived 32 years as a fool. That's either an achievement or a tragedy, depending on your perspective. The bells are heavy, the smiles hurt, and the jokes stopped being funny 20 years ago. But I lived, after a fashion. Remember that when your time comes, we all exit eventually, but exits can have style. Tomorrow you'll wake up, probably, and perform again. Your hands will shake, your back will scream, your cough will worsen, but you'll smile and jest and pretend that aging is just another act, that death is just the ultimate punchline, because that's what old fools do. They perform their own obsolescence with whatever dignity they can salvage from a profession that offers none. Your sister hasn't spoken to you in 15 years. She lives just 3 villages away, close enough that news of her children, your nephews and nieces you'll never meet, occasionally reaches the castle. When you passed her in the market last spring, she looked through you like you were made of air. Her husband pulled her away, muttering about associating with the castle's creature, your own blood, treating you like a disease that might be catching. The letter from your mother arrived yesterday, delivered by a merchant who made it clear he was doing her a favor even touching something meant for you. She's dying, wants to see you one last time, but the letter is careful to specify you should come after dark and use the back entrance. 20 years of making nobles laugh, and you're still too shameful for a front door. Your father's been dead 3 winters. Nobody bothered to tell you until now. The mainstream historical fact that genealogists rarely discuss is how becoming a jester meant complete social death for your entire family. Parish records show families actually holding funeral services for living relatives who took up the bells. Your name would be struck from family Bibles, your existence denied in polite company. The shame was considered hereditary. Your sister's marriage prospects almost failed when her potential husband learned about her fool brother. You remember the day you left home, desperate and starving, choosing bells over begging. Your mother wept, but not from sadness, from shame. Your father refused to look at you once you put on the costume. No son of mine, he said, and meant it. The neighbors gathered to watch you leave like they were viewing an execution. In a way, they were. The person you'd been died that day, replaced by a jingling joke. Here's a quirky detail from social records. Some families would actually pay their fool relatives to stay away, sending small sums to ensure they never returned home. It was called bell money, or distance coins, a bribe to maintain the fiction that they'd never produced something as low as a jester. Your family was too poor for such arrangements, so they settled for pretending you'd died. Cleaner, simpler, less expensive. The isolation extends beyond blood. You've never had a lover, never will. What person would willingly associate with a fool? The serving girls shrink away when you pass. The stable boys make warding signs. Even the castle's prostitutes, who'll service anyone with coin, refuse your business. I have standards, one told you flatly. You're untouchable in ways that have nothing to do with caste and everything to do with the uniform degradation of your existence. Historians still argue whether jesters were capable of genuine relationships or if their profession made them fundamentally unlovable. But that's an academic asking the wrong question. You're capable of love. You feel it every time you see happy families in the courtyard, every time you watch real friendships among the servants, every time your heart breaks a little more from wanting what you'll never have. The question isn't capability, it's opportunity, and you have none. You tried once, years ago, to court a kitchen maid who showed you kindness. You brought her wildflowers, composed silly poems, performed special tricks just for her. She tolerated it until her friends mocked her for entertaining the fool's affections. The next day, she threw water on you in front of everyone, declaring loudly that she'd rather kiss a pig than a jester. The court found it hilarious. Lord Edward gave her an extra coin for the performance. The other jesters at gatherings understand, but you're all too damaged to offer real comfort. You exchange looks of recognition. Yes, I too am alone. Yes, I too am unloved. Yes, I too will die without anyone mourning. But you can't be friends. Not really. Friendship requires trust, and fools survive by trusting no one. You're all drowning alone in crowded rooms, hands reaching for help that never comes. Children fear you, not the noble children who torment you. They see you as a toy. But common children, village children, your sister's children, you're the monster their parents use for threats. Behave, or you'll end up like the fool. They've absorbed the lesson that you're what happens to failures, to the wrong and the broken and the bad. Your bells are a warning sound, your approach a sign to hide. The journal is your only confidant, the only place you can be honest about the crushing loneliness. Your predecessor wrote, I talk to the spiders because they're the only ones who stay. You understand now. You've given names to the mice in your walls. Hold conversations with your reflection. Create elaborate fantasies where someone, somewhere, cares whether you live or die. Tonight, you decide not to visit your dying mother. The journey would require Lord Edward's permission, which would mean jokes about your shameful family, performances about rejection, turning your mother's death into material. Better to let her die thinking you don't care than to bring your contamination to her final moments. You write a letter you'll never send. I understand. I forgive you. Die believing I'm already dead. It's kinder said than the truth. The bells chime as you shift in your narrow bed, a sound that's followed you through 20 years of isolation. Tomorrow you'll wake up alone, perform alone, eat alone if you eat at all, and sleep alone. You'll smile at people who despise you, just for those who see you as subhuman, and pretend that loneliness isn't eating you alive from the inside. Because that's what fools do. They transform isolation into entertainment, rejection into routine. You're proof that humans can survive without love, without family, without connection. Though whether what you're doing counts as survival is increasingly debatable. But the show goes on, must go on, will go on until you drop. And when you do, no one will mourn the fool. They'll just hire another one, probably before your body's cold. The painted fool in your childhood memories danced and sang, juggled fire and told riddles that made everyone laugh. He seemed magical, transcendent, like joy itself had taken human form and decided to live in the castle. You wanted to be him, to have that power to transform sorrow into celebration, to matter in a world where poor children rarely did. 20 years later, you understand the cruelest joke of all. You became exactly what you wished for. Modern storytellers love their fool narratives. The wise jester who speaks truth to power, the noble clown who chooses laughter over tears, the philosophical entertainer who finds meaning in absurdity. They write plays where fools are secret heroes, movies where jesters save kingdoms with wit and wisdom. They've transformed your profession's suffering into entertainment once again. The ultimate fool's joke, making even misery marketable. The mainstream historical fact that popular culture consistently gets wrong is that most jesters weren't clever rebels or philosophical observers. They were desperate people trapped in a dehumanizing role, surviving through forced performance of joy while experiencing none. Your predecessor's journal contains a bitter entry. They'll romanticize us someday. Mark my words, turn our degradation into drama, our suffering into story. They'll make us symbols instead of seeing us as starving. You've started seeing the ghosts of future misconceptions. Someday, someone will write about the golden age of court fools, imagining witty repartee where there was only terror, seeing defiance where there was only desperation. They'll give you agency you never had, wisdom you couldn't afford, power that would have gotten you killed. Your bells will become symbols of freedom rather than chains, your costume a choice rather than a sentence. Here's a quirky detail from contemporary accounts. Wealthy merchants have started hiring party fools for their celebrations. Actors who pretend to be jesters for a few hours before returning to their real lives. They wear clean costumes, tell prepared jokes, leave when the party ends. You saw one perform last month, healthy, well-fed, choosing to play at what you're forced to live. The nobles found him delightful. You wanted to strangle him with his fake bells. The truth is simpler and sadder than any story. You're not a wise philosopher or a clever rebel. You're a broken person in a silly costume, hungry and tired and afraid, counting the days until your body finally refuses to dance. Your jokes aren't subtle criticisms of power. They're survival mechanisms, carefully calibrated to amuse without offending. Your suffering isn't meaningful or transformative. It's just suffering, raw and real and relentless. Historians still argue whether the jester tradition represented a necessary social valve or institutionalized cruelty, but they're asking the wrong question. It wasn't either or, it was both, always both. Yes, courts needed someone to blame, to mock, to absorb the excess cruelty that might otherwise turn inward. And yes, that need destroyed real humans who had the misfortune to fill the role. You're not a symbol or a metaphor. You're a person, though most days you barely remember that. Tomorrow's Christmas feast will host important guests. Lord Edward wants to impress. You'll perform your finest material, risk your most dangerous stunts, smile your brightest smile. They'll laugh and applaud and go home thinking how charming it is that Lord Edward keeps a traditional fool. How authentic, how delightfully medieval. They won't see the blood you'll cough up later, won't know about the 3 teeth you're missing, won't care that you haven't been paid in 6 months. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of your closet room, you allow yourself one moment of truth. You light your stub of candle and write the final entry in this journal, your real testament, stripped of jokes and performance. I was a person. I had a name before they called me fool. I felt pain though I smiled, hunger though I jested, loneliness though I was never alone. I mattered, even if only to myself. Remember that when you wear these bells, you matter too, despite everything they'll do to convince you otherwise. You hide the journal in its secret place, wondering if anyone will ever read it, if your words will survive longer than your body. Probably not. Probably you'll be forgotten like all the fools before you, replaced and erased, your suffering compressed into a cheerful footnote about medieval entertainment. But maybe, just maybe, someone will understand. Someone will see past the bells to the person forced to wear them. The candle gutters out, leaving you in familiar darkness. Your breathing slows as exhaustion takes hold, the ever-present pain fading to background noise. Tomorrow will bring fresh humiliations, new cruelties, the same forced smiles. But tonight, for these few precious moments, you don't have to perform. You let your face relax into its natural expression, not a smile, not a frown, just the neutral face of someone too tired to pretend. It feels foreign after all these years, like wearing someone else's skin. But it's yours, the real you beneath the paint and bells, the person you were before the world decided you were only worth laughing at. The winter wind whispers through cracks in the walls, carrying the distant sound of noble laughter from the great hall. They're celebrating something, they always are, while you lie here in the dark, bones aching, stomach empty, heart heavy with the weight of 20 years of forced joy. But the wind also carries something else, the promise that all things end, even suffering, even fools, even the longest performance. Your eyes close, and for once, you don't dream of bells or jokes or painted smiles. You dream of silence, blessed silence, and what it might feel like to exist without an audience. Somewhere in that silence, beneath the layers of fool and jester and performer, the person you used to be still breathes, still hopes, still remembers what it felt like to be human. And in that remembering, in that quiet defiance of everything they've tried to make you, perhaps there's the only truth that matters. You survived, broken, bitter, and beaten down, but breathing. They turned you into a fool, but they couldn't quite kill the person underneath. That's not a happy ending. There are no happy endings for fools, but it's an ending, and after 20 years of endless performance, maybe that's enough. The bells will ring tomorrow, the jokes will flow, the smile will return. But tonight, in the darkness, you're just yourself, and despite everything, that's still something.